Hello and welcome. My name is Greg Ewing, and on behalf of Engineers Australia, I'm delighted to welcome you to our Infrastructure Thought Leaders webinar on New South Wales building reforms. I'll be your moderator for this evening's great debate. Firstly, in keeping with our tradition, I would like to pay Engineers Australia's acknowledgements and respects to the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet. This evening, we are broadcasting from the land traditionally of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. The Gadigal people, like all First Peoples of Australia, have lived and met on this land to have conversations about their community, their culture, and their connection to that. They have met here for thousands of years to ensure that their community and culture not only survives, but thrives. So it's in that context that we hold tonight's conversation to look at some of the changes and challenges that are facing us this evening. So we pay our acknowledgements and our respects to their elders and their leaders, past, present, and emerging. Before we get started, I would also like to pay our acknowledgements. Tonight's seminar is being hosted with our industry partner, Brickworks Building Products. Brickworks Building Products is one of the largest and most diverse building material manufacturers. The company has built an enduring reputation with their customers and are loved for their innovation, professionalism, and dependable products and services. As Brickworks Building Products expands globally, they continue to foster and advance their products and brand, continuing to lead the way through design, style, innovation, sustainability, and collaboration. With a broad product portfolio and manufacturing and sales facilities across Australia and North America, Brickworks is uniquely placed to service the demands of the building industry. By way of a little illustration, I would like to welcome this short video from Brickworks.
Strong, secure, everlasting, innovative, resilient, stylish. Throughout the past 110 years, the face of building materials has continued to evolve. We're here for a lifetime of living. This is Brickworks. More than brick, and more than just building products, we are a foundation for today's lifestyle and a leader for today's style. We manufacture a wide range of building products like no other, local and international innovation, sourced from around the world to exceed customer expectations. Bricks, roof tiles, pavers, masonry blocks and retaining walls, precast concrete, concrete sleepers, stone. Distinctive and luxurious products, beautiful products that stand the test of time. Our pursuits have no borders. We continue to expand internationally with an increasing portfolio of brands in North America, including Glengarry, Sioux City Brick, Lawrenceville, and Cushwa. More than just building, we're building with confidence. Sustainable manufacturing and products that are shaping our future. We are committed to conducting business that best serves the interest of the community and the building industry, so that we create strong and enduring relationships. Brick continues to inspire some of the most incredible architecture and engineering around the world. Designed and developed through product partnerships with leading architects. Custom and bespoke products for endless design creativity. We are helping to shape the architectural landscape. Sustainable, distinctive, robust, customizable. Building the impossible and turning designs into reality. Everlasting expressions of colour, texture and form. Not just a building process, but an intimate and personal statement of style, colour and lifestyle commitment. Constructing places of creativity, hubs of inspiration, places of possibilities. Our design studios continue to evolve. Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, Hobart, Perth, and coming soon, Philadelphia and New York. Providing a one-stop shop for products, design advice, industry-leading events, and thought leadership discussions. Attracting like-minded individuals, creating partnerships, inspiring style, informing thoughts, and evolving our industry. Over 110 years of experience, a suite of market-leading brands, building inspiration and innovation with an unmatched standing of style. This is Brickworks.
As I mentioned, our conversation tonight is looking at some of the challenges that we face in terms of, I suppose, a post-COVID growth, recovery, and leveraging some of the great opportunities that those challenges bring us. We have 4 fabulous panellists, James, Tony, Matt, and Katherine, who I'll introduce you to. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to James. James Glastonbury. So Dr. James Glastonbury was appointed as Technical Director for Laing O'Rourke's Australia Hub in March of 2017. Having held a number of senior leadership roles prior to this, including as Engineering Director for Laing O'Rourke's in-house innovation team, the Engineering Excellence Group. As an engineering enterprise, Laing O'Rourke is heavily committed to challenging traditional industry practices to find improved ways of delivering project outcomes. Laing O'Rourke was recently acknowledged for its efforts in robotics and worker safety in the 2018 AFR Most Innovative Companies Awards. In his current role, James leads the technical agenda for Laing O'Rourke's Australia business, working with bid and project teams to define and deliver innovative engineering solutions. He leads a team charged with responsibilities for digital engineering, quality, data initiatives, technical strategy, assurance, and design leadership. He is focused on helping shape and influence an industry that will be positively disrupted by a rapidly emerging landscape of technologies now and over the next 5 to 10 years. Our second panellist today is Tony Laverato. Now, Tony is Oricon's Director of Design for Structures, with over 36 years' experience in designing major structural projects across Australia, the Middle East, and Asia. Tony plays a key role in designing the most technically complex projects for Oricon's clients, acting as the custodians of the design from start to finish. Tony's involvement in projects extends from the initial concept phases through to construction and delivery and post-occupancy and operations. Tony has developed expertise in many aspects of structural engineering and worked on several iconic and award-winning projects like 5 Martin Place, 161 Castlereagh Street, and the Barangaroo Ferry Hub. Tony is currently the Director of Design on Sydney Metro projects. He is passionate about both design and construction quality and has contributed to Engineers Australia's publications on building confidence, how to use engineers to improve building and construction. He participated in the Building Industry Working Group and currently sits on Engineers Australia's Structural College Board. Our third panellist is Matt Davidson. So Matt is Regional Manager, New South Wales at Inhabit, based in the Sydney office. Matt is responsible for leading facade design and delivery across a variety of high-profile projects within the region. With a double degree in civil engineering and commerce, Matt has a technically led outlook that sees him working across a variety of building typologies and client sectors. He uses his expertise working with architects, fabricators, and builders in the design of facades, whilst managing quality control through the supply chain from a logistics perspective. Complementing his focus on the technical delivery of facade systems, Matt also is experienced in the consideration and integration of various access and maintenance designs during initial project planning and development. With an interest in durability and permanence, Matt also has an in-depth technical understanding of stone cladding systems and techniques, having worked across a range of projects, designing a variety of fixing systems using different stone types. Matt has worked on a range of high-profile projects overseas and in Sydney, including Barangaroo Towers, Greenland Tower, Chanel and Castlereagh Street, 1 Denison Street and 5 Martin Place. He has recently overseen Inhabit Consulting for Circular Quay Tower and 388 George Street. Our fourth panellist this evening is Katherine Wisby. Now, Katherine is someone I know well, and she's a registered architect with over 30 years of practice experience across varying building typologies for design, documentation, and site services. These include hotels, apartments, residential, commercial, education, childcare, primary and second, aged care, hospital, industrial, and heritage buildings. Katherine has appreciated multiple perspectives from experience working for US, UK, and Australian businesses, including Foster and Partners, SOM, AGNC, Turner, and most recently Crone. In her role as 2019 to January 2021 President of the New South Wales Australian Institute of Architects, Katherine was involved first-hand with the New South Wales Building Commissioner, government, legislators, opposition and crossbenchers in advocating for improved building environments. And to borrow a line from Katherine, one of the things that really came out of this, I suppose, was close collaboration between government and industry and the institutions. So as a start point for our conversation, this conversation is in the context of the New South Wales building reforms. But as we know, even since the Design and Building Practitioners Act passed in Parliament last year, the world has changed considerably. We are faced with a number of challenges and opportunities, and indeed we have a new destination and a different journey to take. So the first question that I'm going to put to James is a very broad and wide question. And if James and everyone else to follow, if you could perhaps give us a couple of minutes or so on what you think is, what is it that we're trying to achieve? And what will our children inherit?
Thanks, Greg. That is a broad question, and I think our mission has changed. 2020 was a year like no other. I don't think any of us planned to have the year that we ended up having. I think as we come out of the public health crisis that 2020 was, our role in what follows after probably becomes more acute and more important. And there's a responsibility that sits in the work that we as professionals and broadly the construction sector and engineering and architecture professions play. There is no doubt the economic rebuild will be focused around construction and infrastructure. Governments have done that for generations. We've tended to build our way out of these economic crises. I think the real opportunity is we can't tackle that task the same way we have historically. We have to use this task to drive some of the really important industry change that we know will leave a better world for the generation of tomorrow. And that is across multiple dimensions. We're going to talk about some of the building reforms that address some particular issues in quality. I think quality is certainly one element that needs to be addressed as we tackle the workload ahead. Diversity is another element of that. Our role in driving sustainability. You know, as a sector of the global economy, our footprint is too great, and we can drive some real lasting positive change on sustainability measures, and that's sustainability in all its forms, not just environmental sustainability, but supply chain and so on. So I think there is a great responsibility that comes with the task ahead, and probably to unlock that is going to require a degree of courageous thinking and collaboration that perhaps isn't seen enough in the industry. I think we're seeing some green shoots around more collaborative forms of contract that unlock or encourage more courageous thinking and innovation. but I think there's more work that we need to do. So I'm very optimistic for the role of engineers and architects and the broad industry in the task ahead, but it's going to require some bold conversations.
Okay, thank you, James. So, Tony, if you'd like to pick up on that same question, what would be your own views around some of those challenges and opportunities in our destination?
I was amazed last year how, as an industry, given the challenges we had with the health crisis, with the COVID crisis, how quickly we innovated. Certainly as an organisation, we innovated very quickly to deliver our clients our service. And hearing amongst the industry in general, the general discussion was, well, we innovated, and we actually were able to deliver our service to our client in a more efficient way. And I think it's just an example of how, when you're forced to do things differently, to think things differently, you generally respond in a positive way. And I was encouraged, now looking at 2021, and as James says, it's historic that our industry is sort of fundamental in the recovery plan. And I think one of the reasons why is that what you see in terms of construction is the tip of the iceberg in terms of the supply chain and how many people are actually involved in, when you see a construction site, how many people are involved in actually delivering that particular day's activity. So it's sort of logical that our industry can generate a lot of work and aid in the recovery for a very broad sector of the community. In terms of the challenges, one of the things we need to do is to, as James says, is to think a bit differently, but we can't depart from some of the core values around sustainability, delivery of quality, and the durability of what we'll be constructing over the next couple of years. Because beyond our clients, we have a sort of a duty to the next generation that use the particular building or the infrastructure that we create. So certainly, I think the key is thinking differently, innovating, using the great work that we did all of us did last year to think differently and deliver our service to our clients differently, to use that momentum going forward, not just go back, not have the mindset that I wanted to go back to what it was before. We need to step off from where we are now.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Katherine, I'll come to you next. The same question, very broad question. From your own perspective, what do you think some of those challenges and opportunities are, and how do we identify the right destination?
Okay, 3 areas I'd hit on. The first one being to rethink and reframe what our living and working environment is. The second one is carbon zero / sustainability, and the third one is First Nations and recognising the great knowledge base that's there. So I'll go back to the first one, and that's reframing and re-understanding our working and living environment. So if we can remember, obviously I don't remember this personally, but the Great Depression. And so to try to make a big difference then, the government, New South Wales or Sydney, decided to put money into fixing up and creating external swimming pools at each one of the Sydney beaches. And that's a great legacy to go back to. At the beginning of COVID, I know Department of Planning were thinking, hey, what can we do that's another legacy? And something that they came up with, which I think is brilliant, it also came from that whole collaborative approach, is let's look at our working environments and our living environments, knowing that so many people are actually working from home. And let's think of how, now that we're actually appreciating the outdoor space, because you've got to go out, you've got to exercise, we're taking up a little bit more area because we're walking down the streets. You can't necessarily be so close next to somebody on the footpath. Let's look at local communities and see if we can block off some of the streets around there and make them open areas. They've done huge sections of that here in Sydney. It aligned with George Street and the tramways, and then extending it in certain areas, including increasing bike routes. So I think it's that idea of us appreciating the outdoor space, that when we design, we need to be aware of not just the extents of the building, but what's past that. What environment are we giving to people? And then the space inside, how do we use that space inside? Nobody would have expected we'd all be living from home and working. So in the middle of COVID, I had mum and dad, so I was upstairs working, my husband was downstairs, and both the boys are in their bedrooms. So, you know, suddenly the house was different, and their bedrooms had to be somewhere where they slept as well as where they did their schoolwork or their uni work, and upstairs was, you know, that was our living room as well. So we just had to balance that and to rethink our environments, how they're going to be. Second one is sustainability and carbon zero, and I'm going to say carbon zero 2030 is where we need to be. Not 2050, not this thing that the federal government is unfortunately trying to latch themselves onto. It's 2030. Now, there is architects declare, there's also engineers declare, and there's now builders declare in Australia. So I think that's something that we need to take forward to leave something that's better for the next generation. So I then follow on to my final one, which is recognising and acknowledging our First Nations people. So this is a culture that we are incredibly lucky here in Australia to be aware of. So carbon zero from 60,000 years ago is pretty amazing. Why don't we listen? Why aren't we aware? Why can't we do more in terms of encouraging more First Nations people to become engineers, to become architects, to work in our offices, to understand what information they have that they're more than willing to share?
Awesome, thank you. Matt, last but not least in that opening question, so from your, I suppose, your own personal perspective and professional perspective, what are we heading in the right direction? What's our destination and the challenges and opportunities along that route?
I think those are three great points from Katherine in terms of what we need to aim for. I think part of that aim is that instead of looking at a project for 3 years, 5 years, it is looking at it for the next generation. And I think that's really important because the timeline that we measure performance and we measure costs needs to be a longer period. So I think once you start incorporating that sort of generation difference into those measuring tools, the outcomes will start to change. I think at least from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges is, coming from a facade perspective, is procurement. So the facade is made up of a whole range of different materials. Those materials have historically been made overseas. In the last 10 years, that's probably concentrated in Asia. So with the issues around COVID and probably geopolitical issues, that has started to get more difficult. I think there's increased risk there now in terms of timing. We'll probably touch on quality later. And both of those have cost effects. So it's, I think that's one of the challenges because those risks aren't going away at the moment. And what we've started to see is people respond and people start to, while the manufacture of those raw materials is always going to be overseas, assembling them has started to come back locally, which is great to see. So I think already we're seeing a response to the issue we've had and the, I guess, COVID that we had last year, which is great to see.
Yeah, that's great. So I was thinking about where we could take this conversation next, and quality, sustainability, resilience, there's a whole range of different things in that space, and there's lots of challenges that COVID really brought into that space. Maybe picking up on a very particular point, sustainability. Maybe let's start the conversation there. What is our responsibility as designers and engineers and of the future and now in terms of the environment to push further in terms of sustainability and that carbon zero that you were mentioning? So when we look at that, we have the Department of Planning has been proactive and encouraging development to go that way, but as designers and practitioners of the future, what is our responsibility to push into that sustainability space? Now, if we can tackle COVID-19 and its challenges, we have that other wicked problem to solve, which is climate change. So how do we take that? Maybe if I start back with you on that, Matt, we'll just...
Yeah, sure. I think we've already started to get, tools to help with the operational side of carbon emissions and energy use. So that obviously does have an effect, but the operational carbon emissions are only part of it. So there's obviously construction as a industry has a lot of emissions generated in the construction phase, which can be measured through, the embodied energy and embodied carbon of products. So I think there hasn't been a measuring tool for that that's been readily used. It is available, and it is touched on overseas, but I think locally we can probably have, it should be our responsibility to push that here locally. And I think we are seeing part of that. We do have a strong push from the structures side with using timber now instead of concrete and steel, and that's been a really positive response. Like you look at the building Atlassian's planning for Central Station, and they've got really well-known high-level ideas on embodied carbon and trying to push the boundaries there of what can be achieved. And I think it would be great to see more of that. So more instead of the idea of this is the limit, this is what we can do with timber, it would be great to see, people challenging that. And I think as engineers and as architects, that's our responsibility.
And maybe a follow-up on that point too. You mentioned about that sort of logistics and supply chain, and a lot of the products come from overseas. So this city was built by sandstone that was quarried in Piermont, literally just across there. So if we are going to take an opportunity to onshore some of that procurement chain, what lessons can we learn from the past and indeed from overseas that we could put into place? Do you see any opportunities in there in terms of the procurement side?
I think there's definitely opportunities. Just touching on the sandstone, sandstone's great because City of Sydney do have a real drive that any sandstone that is dug up on site does need to be used in that project, which is great to see. So I know there's a great big hole in the ground at the moment near Circular Quay as part of the Yoo-Hoo development, and it almost looks like it's 6 stories of sandstone that's been dug up from the basement there, and I look forward to seeing where that's put to use. It'd be great if it's on that side. It would be great if it's somewhere in the area. In terms of overall procurement and how we bring that back to Sydney, I think there already is, but there needs to be a strong focus on what actually makes up the material that we get. I think we've run into trouble in the past that you might be sold a certain product and not know exactly what makes up that product. So in terms of responsibility and testing, I think that's almost the engineer and designer's responsibility to ask the questions, what actually is this product that I'm being suggested to use? And part of that is traceability. So I think that will be, it already is a strong factor that will be followed up in design.
Good. And maybe on that point, passing to Katherine in this one, this is something that came up in conversation a lot over the last year or two when we've been looking at building reform, that selection and use of materials and what goes into a building that you design. So picking up on some of Matt's comments, what do you think we can do in terms of that selection of the materials that we use as well in the design process that will help us towards sustainability and carbon zero?
So, well, it's always a matter of questioning, as Matt said, where has that come from? And I think technology will help us too, because we know where we're going is that we will be getting data traces on all products. Not immediately, but it will happen. So you know how you can buy your eggs and they've got bar scales over it, or you buy your blister pack of your drugs and it's got a bar stamp on it, and that says exactly where that is sourced from. Now, I understand that it's actually really hard to do that for drugs because drugs come from, one particular corner of a poppy field in the middle of, Malaysia or wherever, whereas building products tend to come from one particular area and then they're manufactured somewhere. So we will eventually see that. And what we need to make sure is that we ask for the history of where something comes from, and that we look at how far away they are, and we should be looking at trying to get things that are as close as possible.
Okay, so the whole sustainability piece is a huge conversation in its own right. So from your perspective at Laing O'Rourke, James, what is it that Laing O'Rourke's doing in terms of that push towards sustainability and a carbon zero target?
That's a live conversation, and you know, we feel a great responsibility to do more and perhaps lead some of the conversation. I think Catherine's point around the level of the conversation on these shores, you know, I think many of us are not satisfied we're going far enough, fast enough. At a corporate level, we're doing a number of things, and we'll be quite public in some of those things. Recently shifted all our fleet in Europe to electric vehicles. So and that's one important step. There's a whole lot more that we want to do. Some of the things that we really want to find the partners and go and explore and find new ways of working are things like you know, when you take, I'm horrified to read a statistic around the greenhouse gas impact of just the manufacture of concrete and steel. Something like 10% of the burden vests in the production of those two materials alone. You know, if we can tackle concrete mix design, and you know, the more we can take off-site in traditional Portland cement mixes and put in sort of precast type production where we can control the curing and adopt alternative materials rather than Portland cement, that will go a long way. That's going to require some of those courageous conversations that I talked about in my introduction, where we have to still adhere to really robust standards. You know, we need structures that perform and are fit for purpose. So we have to do the engineering diligence, but we have to find those things that we can, you know, chip away at, and that's one that we're continuing to explore.
Okay, thank you, James. Tony, you're involved in some pretty big projects and have now and in the past. So, and looking at your 36 years or so, I think, of experience, if we're turning towards that sustainability and a carbon zero, what lessons do you think we should be learning in that space, and what would you pull on that we could maybe do differently going forward?
And thank you for reminding me again how many years I've been there. So in those long years, I look at some of the buildings and some of the infrastructure that I've been involved in, and you look at them 10, 15, 20 years down the track, and you start to see perhaps where, if I went back, I would have paid a lot more attention to some of the material selection in terms of how much maintenance that they require. Because I think, as Matt said, there's a lot of energy that goes into building. There's certainly a lot of energy that goes into maintaining. And so sometimes when you look at a particular material selection, and your client, or you know, there'll be certain standards that you need to obviously adhere to, but some of them talk about design life, and also within design life there's a period to first maintenance, and then there is a requirement to meet that standard, meet that design life, but not realising, or perhaps we're acutely more aware now that what's required to meet that design life is a certain amount of regular maintenance that's required to paint the outside or put scaffolding up to undertake this maintenance. And I look and think, well, I think I'd be a little bit more, or trying to educate the industry, the clients and the users, that maybe looking at from a sustainability point of view, there is merit in looking at really long-term materials that take less maintenance and less requirement to sort of keep or to maintain, and certainly a lot of this non-structural, a lot of the facade. There's a lot of non-structural elements or non-critical elements that go onto buildings that within 10, 15 years start to deteriorate, but they're within the design life that you've perhaps has been specified. But I'd be questioning now design life of all elements within certainly some of the public utilities such as the transport do really require a great deal of attention. And I think that to me is also a part of a sensible sustainable design as well.
So that whole of life cycle piece and that longevity of how do we actually get that, the change of focus perhaps? And I think there's been that traditional sort of focus in the capex. So how do we get that change of focus? And given our experience most recently, is how do we get the people who are paying for it to think about not just the initial costs but the ongoing costs, and not just in terms of the money but in terms of the impact on our environment and our society and indeed our economy over the years to come?